This is the spread of the movement online using our sort of analysis of local and national group, or local and state level groups. And at the time, it was really interesting. Neal and I were sort of watching this happen, right? We're like, well, where's South Dakota? Where's South Dakota? And then it gets one. And so we're kind of just waiting this out so that it reaches every state. But sort of by the middle of October, it's hit every state. It had some sort of presence there. And so both in Tar River Square and in the Occupy movement, there's a lot of talk about what tools protesters are using, right? People are going, they're surveying the protesters at the protest, they're looking at the websites, they're posting polls, they're blog posting about it. And there's this pretty heavy focus on Facebook. People are really using Facebook as an organizing tool. Now they're using Twitter when they're there, right? They're using Twitter for the quick and response to say, I'm getting arrested, and those sorts of things. But they're really using Facebook as this sort of core organizing tool. So it's sort of shown to be most important based on surveying visitors to OccupyWallStreet.org and by looking at people who are physically at the protest. So because Facebook is arising as this really central feature for this type of protest event, we decided, okay, let's focus on Facebook first. Let's see what's going on Facebook. So what we did was collect all of the publicly available data. So the Occupy movement, because it was supposed to be so inclusive and open, really focused on having public pages, right? And so that meant you didn't have to have a Facebook account. You could just go and look at them. And yes, websites were sharing plenty of information that was not on Facebook pages. Most groups, at least in the early weeks, did not necessarily have a website because the cost of entry online for a website is slightly higher. Someone has to build that website. And you know, the Facebook was a lot. We did take a look at the websites, and we do have some data on them, but the Facebook groups were a lot more interactive. People were talking a lot more. They were posting and commenting. And so for us, we were really interested in these sort of exchanges. So we took all of the publicly available data on the Occupy groups. What we did first was take some releases of Occupy Facebook pages where people were compiling lists. And we sort of took those lists and we did a pretty basic network sample. We said, okay, let's look at all the posts and comments in all of these pages, right? At this time we're talking about, I don't know, maybe we have a list of 150 we're starting with. Then let's network sample them. Let's see who wrote or commented or did anything along those lines and had the word Occupy in their name. Now, we got a little messed up on this and had to spend a lot of time sorting out the junk because people did things like name themselves Sarah Occupy Gaby. This wasn't really great for us, although it was a really interesting sort of cultural move in terms of how people interpreted what was going on and a marker of sort of like the openness and inclusiveness of the movement. So I hand-coded all of these to make sure they were real groups, and then I split them into what you see here, which were sort of our rough categorization of who they were really focusing on reaching. So the Wall Street group, there were several. There was an Occupy Wall Street group. There was an Occupy Wall ST period group. These were used at different points for different reasons. And then there were also these national groups, things like Occupy the Government, Occupy the Media. And then state groups, you know, Occupy Illinois, Occupy North Carolina, and local groups is going to be sort of your Occupy UNC, Occupy Durham, Occupy Chapel Hill, Occupy Chicago. Some of these are far-reaching, right? Your sort of Occupy Chicago is pretty far-reaching versus your Occupy North Carolina. But the idea is that they're sort of accessing people in their community roughly, and for some that's larger and for some that's smaller. And so we do only take this public data, like I mentioned, which I'll say up front is limiting, right? So first of all, we don't know if anybody posts on their own page, like, I support Occupy Wall Street, I'm going to the protest tonight, why are those protesters doing whatever outside my home? These sorts of things we don't capture. So if you post that, though, onto any Occupy website, we capture that. So if you go to the Occupy Durham website and say, is there an event happening tonight? We've captured you in our data. So that's limiting. We miss people, that's for sure. Now, in terms of missing groups, our best guess is that we have systematically missed very small groups. Groups that aren't communicating with other Occupy sites by posting on their Facebooks. Maybe groups that are in cities where there's not a lot of, they're pretty dispersed. There's very few people participating, and so there's not a lot of exchange going on. So systematically, we imagine that we've missed small groups. Now, that's not to say we don't have small groups. We have groups as small as, 6 people, or probably even smaller. But, we definitely feel like we've missed some of these groups just because of the way that we were able to sample. All that said, we have about 400 Facebook pages. Those are unique pages for unique locations, although if there was a duplicate and it was really 2 different groups, we included them both. I looked at all of these pages and I made sure that it wasn't that, Occupy Chapel Hill had become Occupy UNC or something like that, or that a city had changed its name. That sometimes did happen. So I went through and hand eliminated all of that sort of error from our data set. And so based on all of that, we took a list and we ran it through the Facebook Developer API. Not to go into too much depth, but getting data from Facebook is hard, right? They don't make it easy. So an API, you've probably been exposed to already, is intended for people developing things like apps. Like if you want your website to integrate with Facebook, you go on the API and you build a program to do that. What we did was say, okay, we're developing the program, sure, but what we want our program to do is collect data, right, which organizations do. They collect data. They have apps that collect your data and look at what's going on for marketing purposes, for all kinds of purposes. So we go in that way. We gain access to the data by applying as a developer to get to the API, which we do very forthcomingly. And then we are able to scrape all of the public pages. Now again, Facebook won't give you private data. You can buy it, but they won't give it to you sort of publicly through the API. So we scrape all of the posts and comments on every page that we find, about 400 pages. Again, we had to go through this process a couple of times because of the way we were network sampling, but that's generally how the process went through. And once we did all of that, we collected it all, we stored it all, and we looked here. You're looking at a graph of the first month of the occupation. And this is how many Facebook pages are created by day in the first month of the occupation. So things that we can identify with this data are things like every post and comment, the date of every post, the name of the poster, and also when someone joins the data set. So for us, that's their first post or comment. I don't think I can play. Can I play this video? I don't imagine I can play this video that I embedded in here. This is the one that has the size of the movement. But more importantly, what the video does, and I can try to send it out later somehow, is looks at cross connections between groups. So across the country, what we are really interested in really early is, are these groups talking to each other? Well, we know they are because that's how we found them. So where are they? So what you're looking here is the OWS site, and the site, I think it's San Francisco, and they're talking across each other, right? So this is 9:16. This is really early. We already see cross-posting to these groups. I don't know how to run it in app sharing. I'll send it by email. And so, after the first couple of weeks, this map becomes so incredibly saturated because there's just so much exchange between groups. There's a lot of cross-communication. Some of it is people who live in one place and want to find a group in another place they're traveling. Some of it is resharing of videos and photos and all that kind of stuff that sort of you tend to think of when you think about sharing on Facebook. But there's definitely a lot of cross-communication going on. And the movement's growing really fast. So we chart new participants. That's what we're looking here. And by that, again, people who first post or comment. So we count new users here, and we find up to 10,000 new users join a day, right? This is sort of at the peak that there's 10,000, but if you add these together, that we're doing pretty well here at capturing a very large number of people on Facebook. Highest participation is in early October, right? And so all in all, we look at about 300,000 people joining this conversation on Facebook. Now, again, this isn't just people liking the page. We say, for the purpose of this data, what we're interested in is exchange. It's not sort of this just we're going to like a page. So while we capture the likes, and while I'll talk about them a little when I talk about the specific images, what we here care about is like some really low bar level of participation. So if you like or commented, you've actually gone out of your way to do something. So this is 300,000 unique users who become part of any of the groups on Facebook that we're looking at. That's about 400 of them. And so 300,000 people, according to several of the polls of Tea Party websites is more than the people participating on the Tea Party's social media. So at that point, we're thinking, well, this is pretty big. This is getting large. And so altogether, they comment about 60,000 posts and comments a day at the peak. This is, 300,000 users, and they're doing a lot of conversation. They're making a lot of data for us and a lot of conversation for the movement over time. And so in total, more than 2.5 million posts and comments between September 15th and the end of the calendar year. We sort of stopped collecting at the end of the calendar year because things very heavily petered off. And so for the sake of this analysis, we'll just talk to the end of the calendar year.